All right, Eric, John, thank you so much for being here. And before we dive into today's topic, I would love to start with introductions. So, John, I will open the floor to you. Get us started.
Yes, Nadia, Eric, so happy to be joining you guys today. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jon Moran. I'm responsible for the marketing of our MarTech solutions at an organization by the name of SAS. SAS is well known for data management and analytics, but we also have software solutions and a customer engagement platform that we lovingly call SAS Customer Intelligence 360 is one of those solution areas. So that is what I'm responsible for at SAS. Outside of work, I live in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. I have a wife and 2 kids, and in my free time, I love all things music and sports. So happy to be discussing data with you guys today.
Phenomenal. Next webinar we're going to talk about music and sports. I can talk about that for hours. Eric, over to you.
Yeah, name is Eric Westerkamp. I'm the CEO here at CaliberMind. CaliberMind is a B2B kind of go-to-market intelligence platform. We do a ton of work for enterprise B2B organizations, helping them kind of consolidate all of their data, all of their information, get it into a graph that they can really use, and then we bring really deep analytics and understanding on everything from attribution to ROI to engagement for those customers. Outside of that, I live just outside of Boulder, Colorado, where I've been for almost 30 years. And hobbies include, when I'm not working, skiing, mountain biking, and a little bit of rock climbing still.
Phenomenal. Thank you. So you're already going to tee up today's topic. The word on the street for any marketer of what you do in 2025 is AI adoption, right? Everybody's racing to adopt AI, to bring AI into their organizations. And as I watch this evolution or AI agents these days, not everybody starts with thinking about building the right foundation to become this AI-ready organization, to have what it takes, right? And data literacy is one of those things that comes up more and more often. And then data leadership is, the second steps to that. And I would love to start the conversation with data being the elephant in the room, right? The bloodline of the business. And John, my first question is to you. So SAS is a legendary name in analytics. You guys live and breathe data. I've watched you on MarTech days, your presentations, phenomenal stuff. And from your seat, what's the real tangible cost for marketing teams that do not have data literacy? What do you see like the biggest, most painful gap between data that people have and the insights that they can extract and actually act on?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And simply put, the tangible cost of lacking data literacy is massive. It's absolutely massive, and it permeates all aspects of an organization. If you don't have people inside an organization who have the proper data literacy skills. So, I'm going to speak on the given that marketing teams out there can actually collect and have access to the data they need, because that's often the first and largest challenge is I would really love a piece of data, but I don't know how to get that data or where to get that data and how to join it in with my existing repositories. But, without having data literacy or having that team that not only understands the data, but the relationships required to make the data work together for things like marketing and customer engagement, you're really starting off on the wrong foot. And you'll see, waste. You'll see wasted, spend. You'll wasted time, missed engagement opportunities, and an overall lack of a cohesive strategy because teams don't understand what data they have and what data they can use for what purposes. So, I'll give some kind of personal examples here, right? I don't want to just, espouse things. I want to actually give the listeners some actual examples of things that I've run into, right? So first off is optimization, right? Optimization is an analytical technique that's very strategic in nature, right? Customers must be understood and data must be translated properly in order to perform optimization, which is knowing who to contact, when to contact them, and with what message. Because if you're not optimizing, your customer engagements, you are performing contact saturation, and you're eroding customer trust. Because believe it or not, consumers don't want to hear from your brand every time or every single day or multiple times a day, right? And especially, SaaS, we deal largely with regulated industries, so banks, insurance companies, so forth and so on, healthcare, government. You've got to know when to contact people, and you've got to know what you can say and what you can't say. And without understanding data, that can get you in some serious problems, right? Some serious hot water. And, we have multiple customers that we work with that have told us that they communicate less now than they have before, and they're seeing more effective marketing results because they understand their data and they understand their customers, right? So no optimization leads to that poor ROI, wasted budget, and excessive customer acquisition costs. I think what we also see is that lack of data literacy leads to poor segmentation, and poor segmentation leads to poor downstream effects, which are personalization and engagement, right? That's poor personalization is irrelevant messaging, which leads to disengagement and then churn. And we see many examples of brands that we deal with where they get that personalization piece wrong, and customers leave rapidly. And guess what? They don't come back. We're seeing that in the news. We're seeing that in the brands that each of us interact with. And then I think perhaps the biggest result of poor data literacy is the inability to align with business goals, which causes a disconnect between marketing efforts and then the measurable outcomes of marketing efforts, right? Revenue, customer lifetime value. One of the things that we're doing internally, and we've been doing for the past couple of years, to make sure that the marketers at our organization understand the data about our customers, is we have what's called a marketing sciences readout. So if you don't have a marketing sciences team within your broader marketing organization, highly recommend it. These people are the ones that have the hold on the data, right? And they're able to tell us, what are marketing registrations? What are marketing conversions? What's our pipeline look like? What's our revenue? How are our leads contributing to revenue? That sort of thing, right? And so this has been immensely helpful in adjusting our marketing efforts, whether it's a different campaign, different message, different piece of content, that sort of thing. And so that's kind of the first part of your question. I know that was kind of a long answer, but the second part of your question, the most painful gaps between data and insight. Simply put, knowing what type of analytics to use to get from data to insight, requires people who understand the data, right? You can't only understand the data, but then not understand analytics in order to get insight from data, right? So, attribution, I know you guys do a lot around attribution and providing attribution clarity. That's so important, because if teams have data but can't confidently identify what's driving conversions, that's a big issue. And I know attribution's hard. There's different types of attribution, but I highly recommend understanding a way that you can take attribution efforts and simplify them, or find a vendor to help you simplify them for better insight. Customer journey clarity, right? Teams often have clickstream and engagement data, but lack the ability to stitch it together into that coherent, actionable view and then act on it. And we've long heard that CDPs, customer data platforms, are around to solve that challenge. Well, some are and some aren't, but I think that having that clarity and that unified view is very important. And then I think that gaps between data and insight, right? One of the things that we're talking about a lot in the market is the move from enterprise decisioning to AI-based decisioning. And this is where AI is providing a lot of value, right? Moving beyond those static, rigid business rules into adaptive learning, capturing behavior signals. But a lot of brands can capture the data, they can capture those behavior signals, but do they have the tools to shape those into next best actions or offer? So, ultimately, to wrap up my answer, poor data literacy keeps teams in a continually kind of reactive, not proactive state, where they're having to rely on that gut instinct, and that becomes costly in a competitive, quick moving, AI driven landscape.
So you said something that is super interesting, and Eric, I will flip that over to you,
Mhm.
where people struggle to tell the marketing story even though they have the data, but they're not sure what the story behind the numbers tells them. And I feel like on our side, a lot of people come to us trying to answer the question within their business: what's driving our pipeline, what's working, how can we unite the teams and have the handoff from marketing to sales in the most effective way. So Eric, from what you talk to a lot of marketing leaders, you help them figure out how do they think about their reporting, how they tell the story to their business. Um, what advice do you have for them based on everything that John said in terms of being able to actually help others understand what marketing does?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I'll say is that the amount of data that marketers are dealing with has just been going, up and up and up and up and up. I look at our customers and I look at the sheer volume of marketing data they're kind of putting into our platforms, right? And so what's been happening is as digital programs expand, as they test new channels, as they do things, every one of those is generating lots and lots of marketing touch points, right? But the challenge is that the signal to noise in that can be really kind of low. So you have a lot of data, but it's very sparse data. As in, I may have millions of touch points, but maybe 4 or 5%, 10% of those are meaningful for me to help make decisions, right? So it's very easy for marketers to get lost in the noise and trying to figure out kind of what those relationships are, right? So it comes back to the data, and the challenge is that when you have this huge amount of sparse data, and then you have a marketing team that's trying to say, from that sparse data, I need to tie it back to very concrete KPIs. How many MQLs did I get? How much pipeline did I generate? What was my effect on revenue? Did I help with churn? Right, and that's a difficult problem to solve, right? And so the real thing that organizations need to figure out is when you have all that sparse data, you have to consolidate it, you have to stitch it together, you have to dedupe it, and you have to have a process that allows you to take all that data and get it into a single set of information, a trusted data set that then allows you to start to figure out how to make decisions, right? Whether or not you're using your own marketing data warehouse, whether or not you're using the CDP that could potentially do that, or you're using a tool like CaliberMind, you need to get that data centralized so that you can start to pull that signal out of the noise. That's what a lot of these platforms are designed to do, is really take huge amounts of data and pull the signals out. The challenge I've seen with a lot of companies, and especially marketing teams, is they often switch channels. And so there's this problem where the marketing team is like, well, I've turned off this and I've turned on this, and then we changed this and we're doing these new channels. And keeping those data pipelines up to speed and keeping them matching the pace that marketing is moving, that's where we see a lot of difficulty within organizations, right? Is where can their IT, can their data pipelines, can those things keep up with marketing's experimentation often with different channels and different techniques, which are often changing because you have things that are working and now it's not working as well, so we're layering something else in, right? I see a huge gap in organizations and that ability for the organization to keep up with sort of the pace that marketing is going at.
So do you think this challenge is a people problem, a technology problem? And John, I would love your take on that too. But Eric,
Yeah.
we'll start with you. Like, where do we start? Or is it a leadership thing? It has to be an organization-wide effort to bring everybody up to speed with their data literacy.
That's a hard problem. Marketing and a lot of marketers don't come up through data. Like, they're
Mhm.
not coming into marketing from, analytics organizations. I mean, some are, but a lot of them are not. They're coming in there because they like being creative. They like testing out channels. They like writing copy. They like, being on that creative side. But what they're finding is that to justify and figure out if the stuff they're working and doing is having an effect, they've got to become data literate, right? And so I would say there's a huge spectrum of data literacy that we're seeing in marketing organizations. The good thing is that the spectrum is shifting, where more and more organizations are really looking for their teams to become more and more data literate, right? But the leadership for that really has to come top down. If the leadership doesn't really say we need to tie this to true KPIs, they kind of won't, right? Because it's a hard thing to do, and keeping it working is hard. So top down, the management team at some level needs to be bought in, that having good data, understanding the data is really powerful and something that they really want to buy into. And once you get that, then you can start to figure out organizationally, like who owns different pieces, and then how do you move your team more and more toward a data literate world, right? So how do you take, and I'll say that the other thing that's happening right now is that AI and large language models are actually making this a lot easier, because what large language models, I feel, do a great job of is helping people who are maybe not super data literate map kind of their questions into something that the system can then interpret and then go and execute on. Because it's always been the challenge is you'll have a data marketer, they're asking questions, but they don't know SQL. They can't log into the data warehouse and start figuring stuff out. So they have to rely on other teams. I think large language models are really sort of that bridge that's starting to help kind of map between, I've got this question, I need to know these answers. Boom, it outputs potentially code or something that can then go answer these questions. It's going to really help with that data literacy. And I think we're really on sort of the verge of marketing organizations kind of tipping over and becoming much more data literate because of the essentially the new AI and technology that's available now.
Jon, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Eric. I think that, the issue doesn't reside for me in one camp alone. I think it takes, it takes the people, it takes the process, it takes the technology, right, to all work together to make data literacy become a reality for a lot of organizations, right? So people have to be, educated, open, eager to learn. I think that, we're seeing a lot of, at SAS, we were actually founded out of a university, out of North Carolina State University. And, I know at that school, I know at a lot of other schools, we're seeing masters of analytics, masters of data science, even undergrad data science and marketing, analytics style degrees. And we're seeing, we're seeing those people come into marketing, which is awesome because they are comfortable with things like data and analysis and that sort of thing. Inside of large organizations, I think that the processes, they have to be agile, right? I mean, how many times do we hear over and over again, well, I don't have access to that data because that's part of a process that's always been this way, and I've never had that data via this process, and we can't change that process. One of the things we talk about is let's change things, and if it's not working, let's change it. Let's change it right away, and let's push against that norm when it comes to data access and really deriving insight from data. And then finally, I think technology has to be easy to use. I've seen a lot of different analytics platforms in my day, and I've seen ones that you literally log on to it and it is a blank screen with a menu on the left, and that's it. And you got to figure it out from there. What marketer is going to be good enough to do everything that's required to, go from that blank screen to developing some crazy data visualization or dashboard, or, without becoming frustrated, going through training, that sort of thing. So I think, when I say technology has to be easy to use, that means, inputting data, ingesting it, sourcing it, joining it, guiding marketers through how to use it, and how to use analytics properly, and really what to account for. Because, a lot of marketers, as Eric was saying, they don't have a PhD in statistics, right? And so they can't easily, figure out how to do that, right? Consume and use the insights. So I think that, one of my biggest philosophies has always been simple. The most simple always wins, right? No one likes unneeded complexity. And so, I think that we've got to think about all three of those areas: people, process, and technology when we consider the question.
Yeah, that blank screen probably would be the most delightful joy for people from those masters of analytics and statistician degrees, right?
Yeah, right.
The one thing that I feel like, and Eric, you touched on this, that happens a lot within the world of marketing is this environment with terms, abbreviations, acronyms, where people that use those may know the words, but they do not necessarily know the work that goes into those definitions. So I want to talk about definitions and what certain things mean. We talked about reporting structures and figuring out what is it that we're tracking, what are the KPIs that matter. I recently came across this research that was done by American National Advertisers Association. And what they did, they brought about 120 marketers, heads of marketing, CMOs, VPs of marketing in one room. And they said, can you come up with the top marketing metric that you track? And the result of that was 98 different answers. Then, so 120 people, 98 different answers, right? Then the same question was asked to a smaller subset of CEOs. Well, CEOs are busy people. You don't have 120 of them. So it was 30. And out of those 30, they came up with just 3, right? And once they learned that marketers were all over the place with their answers, they understandably got quite upset that, there's like all of this stuff. What really matters? So when we talk about AI ready organizations, again, going back to definitions, what does this really mean? Because I hear we're AI native, we're AI ready. Eric, what's your take on this?
That's interesting. Being both a CEO and working a lot with marketers, right? I see it from both sides. I have the KPIs that I care about as the CEO, and they're not super complicated. I care about how much revenue we're making at the end of the day. I care about how much pipeline we're generating. I care about velocity and some of those things, but only in so much as they affect those other KPIs, right? And I have seen that marketers, I'll get back to what I said before, is that I think one of the reasons that marketers tend to have a lot of KPIs is because they have a lot of data sources and it's very sparse again, right? There's a ton of data. And so it's really hard to nail that data down to a KPI. So what they end up doing is they have a lot of different KPIs that tie to a lot of different parts of their process. So I've got a process over here for website activity. And so here's a KPI around how many people hit my website, how many click through. I've got some advertising going on here. So maybe I have some ROI, but it only might tie to my advertising channels, right? I've got webinars. I may have other KPIs that are tied to like webinars and webinar attendance and those types of things, right? And so the challenge is they have all these different KPIs they're measuring. But if they don't have that consolidated, they don't, again, have a data set that they can really focus in on, those KPIs are really hard to relate to each other. And at the end of the day, it's really hard to relate those back to to be honest, the KPIs that the CFO and the CEO care about: pipeline, revenue, churn, which all get back to growth of the organization, growth of the company, right? When I tell you about AI ready, I hear a lot of companies that are talking about things like, I've got an agentic framework and I'm building all these cool things. Awesome. I've got AI modules and analytics that do all these cool things. Awesome. But if those things are just making more KPIs or just making more little data sets that don't tie to those final numbers, they kind of don't matter, right? It comes back to an AI ready organization is an organization that has focused on getting their data ready. Because without good data, you can't do good AI. There's no chat version of ChatGPT that is going to look at your giant database of 4 billion touch points and give you answers out of it. It doesn't happen. They can't even add properly at this point in time, right? So you have to get your data ready. Once you've done that, then you are AI ready, because then you can start to bring these other tools to bear on that data. They're going to be consistent. This tool looking at the data, coming up with an answer, is going to be consistent with this tool looking at the same data and coming up with an answer. And then you can start to relate them back to the KPIs that matter in the organization.
Jon, I know you talked about even during this last presentation that you did at the MarTech Day about bringing data together, unifying that data. You referenced, which I thought was a very funny reference, data lakes as something that could be murky and shallow and something that you should be mindful of, right? I'm curious how you think about like the kind of the tech stack side of things. So once we got all of this data unified, once we figured out how to bring all of these different things together and talk to each other, right? How do we make it trustworthy and make it accessible for a larger set of users within an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that, marketers, once data is consolidated, they've got to start thinking about other things that relate to the data, right? Governance, enabling people to actually use the data and activating it properly. And I love what Eric said about, to be an AI ready organization, you've got to be a data ready organization first. And so, data governance is a key component of that. It can be a lengthy process, but it's essential, right? People are at the heart of data governance, right? We talk about this idea of data stewards, owners of roles surrounding data accuracy, data compliance, data lifecycle management. And data lifecycle management is something that a lot of organizations don't do very well, which is when data gets stale, it should be retired. It should be archived, just like a lot of other things, right? Once they have moved beyond their useful life, you need to get rid of it, right? And so, rules have to exist around enterprise data. When is that data no longer fresh? Who can it be accessed by? For what purposes? Not all data should just be open and available to everyone in an organization. I think we would all agree with that, right? And then what is the story behind the data? And this is hard to do as well, right? We talk a lot about data lineage. That is the history of the data from inception to transformation to then usage and activation. And I think, data governance also includes accounting for within the lifecycle management data drift and data degradation, right? And so there are technologies out there that help monitor, data drift or decay, and then set alerts for, outliers, anomalies, as well as, hey, this data should probably be retired now, right? And so, we've seen, a lot of different vendors in the space. SaaS has tools for data governance, Elation, Informatica, others, but, those are all important components, right? That idea of governing the data that you have. And then, second piece is enablement, right? There's got to be processes in place to keep data, remaining trustworthy and able to be used in the proper manner, right? And so that involves giving teams the tools that they need, right? Those, not the blank screens, quite the contrary, right? Self-service analytics tools, dashboards that are easy to use, AI assistants. We're going to see more and more. Actually, before this recording, I was preparing for an analyst evaluation that we're about to give, and we're at the point now where we can build visualizations via generative AI prompts. So I can build an entire report or visualization via a series of prompts. And so, having those AI assistants, Eric mentioned a little bit about those, but having them in the future is only going to make the work of generating insight, I believe, easier. And I think it's going to make data literacy easier to some degree as well. I think that, having places where marketers can test and learn and trial things is also very important. I know that I love, as a marketer, taking different, data sets and looking at them, analyzing them, trying to derive insight from them. We do a lot of research in marketing, and we're looking at the results of surveys and reports, and really trying to find that one piece that we can pull out that's really that aha or that gotcha piece of data insight. So I think that's very important as well. And then finally, defining processes within software, for the ability for marketers to create new things. Once they've tested things and tried them out, hey, I want to create a new segment, or I want to discover a new segment or audience, or I want to create a new rule or campaign trigger that I think is really going to help move my marketing efforts forward, right? So, enabling marketers to be able to do things like that with data via technology. And then I think that, enabling activation, right? So making data accessible for a large marketing organization requires understanding how you need to democratize data and how you need to activate data across the MarTech stack, right? It's very important for people that are the provisioners of MarTech ecosystems to make sure that data is not only clean, I think that's kind of obvious, but connected to all of the relevant tools, whether it's the CDP or the journey orchestration or the content engines, or even, ad tech solutions. I think that it's important to ensure that each system can read and act on that same golden customer profile. So we get back to the idea of the profile that might exist in a customer data platform or a cloud data warehouse or what have you, right? It's nirvana to be able to create that golden customer profile, but once you have it and once you know how to update it properly, it works wonders for your organization. And then we've talked about this a little bit already, but data standards, data definitions, data formats. It's important to apply metadata to your data, right? Which means, tagging it consistently so that, content and journeys can be dynamically tailored by audience, by channel, by context. And then finally, accessibility. Create a culture of data empowerment, right? And I think back to what I was mentioning about kind of the marketing sciences readouts that we have. Provide training for people, in data literacy. Encourage them to come to meetings and calls with, data-driven insight versus I think we should do it this way because this is how I feel. No, I don't. I want to see the data behind why you're making the decision that you're making. And so I think that that's very important. So it's important not just to keep data clean, but you've got to keep it credible, right, and useful, ensuring that everyone can, create and act on it, not just kind of view it in a read-only mode, so to speak.
You said so many interesting things that I want to flip into or turn into a question for Eric. But let me first rearrange it so that the second half of this conversation, we will change the view a little bit. But you talked about data democratization. This topic is so interesting to me. And I heard someone, an amazing guy who came from the statistics background, give his take on what data democratization means and whether or not data should be democratized in ways that we think about it. And here's his take. So he said, the idea of putting data in the hands of those who may not have the sophistication and the savviness and the ability to even understand what they're looking at could be potentially a dangerous thing, because to you and me, if we have certain backgrounds and we have certain experiences and training, a report may mean one thing, or without contextual knowledge to someone else, it could be a completely different thing. So Eric, I would love for your take on kind of this concept of either making data available for people to do as they please with it, even like say within the marketing team, versus having someone, whether it's the data steward or the person who's in charge, to enable the individual, boots on the ground, individual contributors with the views that they need. That would require, of course, figuring out what do you need? What is it that you want to see? What's the dashboard that serves your role? But give me your thoughts on giving people the data, do as you wish with it, versus building what they need and giving them access to that.
I'll start with a debate that we're having internally around our own product. We have two competing priorities. We have organizations that want to roll out very specific dashboards, and they want to be able to really control, like, these people can see this. I want to be, and what happens is you have organizations that are like, we need these people, we know what the questions they need to answer are, and they want to be able to roll out a dashboard, and that dashboard needs to be like, it's just an attribution dashboard. It's locked down to, the regions or the campaigns or whatever that they care about. And they want to really have a lot of control over how they're deploying and the data that they're actually letting organizations interact with. To extend something, John, you kind of touched upon earlier, which is sort of like, how do you control, and not everybody should have access to all the data. And so we've got that priority. And then I've got other organizations that are coming to me and saying, like, I just want like a chat screen where they can just ask questions and get answers. Those are very different problem sets, right? Because one is very broad. It needs to be able to answer a whole variety of questions. To some extent, it needs access to, you don't know what the question coming in is, so how do you kind of bridge between those two? And I'll say that we're starting with something that's a little bit more focused on allowing the people building the applications, building the dashboards, to be able to ask those questions and be able to build the dashboards in that way. I need a new dashboard. It needs to be like this. I want it to be like this. But once they've kind of tailored it, they deploy it, right? And they can have the ability to lock it down. So it's sort of kind of a mix of those two, which is like certain people in the organization, the marketing data analyst, the marketing operations team, those people to some extent can ask those generic questions and have it build up dashboards and have it create, those answers, and they can kind of tailor how it looks. But then when they're done, they can say like, okay, but I want to lock it down for this thing. I only want, so when these people, my campaign managers or my sales team or whatever, log into the product, they only see these things, right? Now, I will say that there's a bit of a flip side to that, in that when it comes to the customer level buyer journey, we have taken the approach of letting that to some extent be open, because there's lots of generic questions that people want to ask about it and kind of see what's going on. And so we do enable it so that somebody can come in and look at, here's a customer, what's going on with this customer? Tell me like what marketing touch points they've had, who's involved in the buyer journey, who should I reach out to now? And we've opened it up there because what we found is that in organizations at the company level, at that sort of atomic level of a company, the people in the company and all their marketing touch points, they actually want people who are interested in that to kind of have open access to that. And that's sort of the bridge that we've taken in our product. I will say that the debate is still open about a generic ask a question, have it start spinning stuff up. We're looking at it. We're at this point where some of our customers really want that, but others, man, they would freak out if we deployed that out into their platform.
So you can attach then two things, Eric: technology and people.
Mm-hmm.
And Jon, if I move from technology to people and kind of think about ways that organizations can help their workforce build this analytical muscle to be able to understand what's even possible. If I ask the question to the blank screen and the AI box on it that Eric was talking about, what are the possibilities that I understand what comes back? How do I ask it the right way, right? How do we think about, or how does SaaS, or how do you think about training that muscle? Is it just sending everybody to take like a Tableau class? Is it more offering internal training? Like, what's your take? How do you foster this culture of curiosity so that everybody could, go and explore on their own?
Yeah, I mean, I would say on the whole, a lot of people are afraid of data, right? Because it's the unknown, right? They don't understand it. They don't have a good hold on how to manipulate it. And so, I think that, data literacy in today's market really requires not being shy about digging into data, right? Going beyond Microsoft Excel and pivot tables, right? To start thinking strategically about how can I use data to make improvements to, or get rid of marketing initiatives based on analytical insight, right? Stop doing things as well as start doing new things. So I think that, a few characteristics that I would look for in a B2B marketer, right? Are they able to ask the right questions? Can they frame business challenges as problems? And do they think critically and really analytically beyond just vanity kind of metrics? Comfort with technology, pick up a tool, learn something new. If a marketer comes to me and says, oh, I can't do that because I've never used that tool before, that's a red flag. I want to hear the opposite. I've never used it before, but I would love an opportunity to log into it and really see how I can, explore trends, find, new audiences that we can engage with, that sort of thing. Some familiarity as a marketer with data structures and architectures, how data is captured, how it's organized, how it's sourced, how different types of data repositories store data. I think that's basic to know. I don't think that's difficult and asking too much of a marketer, right? And I think that marketers have to have analytical awareness, right? How can I use AI? How can I evaluate an outcome from a predictive model or a prescriptive model or a lookalike model? Again, stuff you could probably learn by asking ChatGPT a question, but being able to understand analytics and use them is very important. And then I would say, this one's a little tougher, but I know this is something that you guys do very well. So maybe they could just use a tool like CaliberMind, but it's comfort, in understanding attribution and how to track ROI and how to validate impact across channels and justify spend decisions and that sort of thing using data, right? So thinking about marketing qualified leads and how that contributes to customer lifetime value, pipeline, and that sort of thing. And then, there's nothing I love more than seeing a marketer come to a room or a meeting with a presentation where they've taken different sources of data, they've analyzed that data, and they've stitched it together into a story that makes sense. Present your insights clearly so that you persuade me to take maybe a completely different path than I had considered, right? And if you can do that as a marketer, you're going to move mountains not only within your organization but probably in your broader career. So I would say, at SAS, and I know at a lot of other organizations, we talk a lot about being curious, right? That's not being timid when it comes to asking hard questions based on data, and be open to failing very fast, right? And that it can be hard to fail fast if you're bound by, organizational red tape or restrictive processes or legacy technology, or the inability to put your hands on the data you need for decision making. I think, it's important to build skills and take the free time that you do have, instead of, scrolling social media, do some micro learning. That's what we like to call it. It's just these little kind of learning modules where you can pick up a few new things or insights that might help you in, the projects you're working on, or that sort of thing. So, always be willing to continue to learn and grow as a marketer, I would say.
Especially with the speed that the change comes at us today, right?
Right.
You talked about telling stories during presentations. And I know, Eric, you talk about telling stories a lot, not just presenting a graph or a chart and say, here's what I got, 15% up, 10% down. These are the numbers, right? And I always feel like there's a disconnect between the sheer volume of marketing metrics and marketing kind of reporting that we look at in the marketing department versus what other departments are used to look at, especially within the C-suite, right? Sales and finance, they deal with more I shouldn't say completely perfect, but more structured data, more binary data. So what would you recommend for marketing leaders that try to bridge this gap with data literacy to help people better understand marketing across their peers? What should they do? What should they think about?
So first, they need to figure out how to translate their metrics into the metrics the other organizations understand, right? And so the metrics that marketing often use, there's very infrequently an equivalent KPI or metric in the other organizations, right? So you're looking at click-through, like even the terminology CPL, like, what does that even mean? And you say that to somebody in sales or even a CFO, and they'll kind of give you this blank stare, and then you tell them the numbers and they don't really know what those numbers mean because they don't understand the metric. So you give them all these numbers around this metric. They don't even know is that good? Is up good or bad? Right? They don't know because they don't understand the metrics and they don't live those metrics. So at the end of the day, if you want to tell a story, you have to put it in the context that the other people actually understand. And so that really often means translating your data down to something that the other people, your sales leaders, your CEO, are going to actually understand what this really means. And that can be very difficult. Again, it goes back to the sparse data problem for marketing. You have to, it's why attribution to some extent exists. Like attribution exists because at the end of the day, marketing is attempting to take all this work and translate it down to a metric: pipeline creation, contribution to pipeline creation, that the rest of the organization can actually understand and use. And so I would say that when you're trying to build a story, it's okay to bring these metrics, but you have to extract the meaning of them and then say this is going up. Why do we care? Why is that good? This helps decrease our sales cycle. When this is going up, our sales cycle is going down. Now your sales leaders can be like, oh, okay, well, that's what I want. So I can do more deals in a quarter, right? But you have to translate those into those metrics that the other teams understand, which also means that marketing people have to understand those metrics. And they have to have good, it gets back to they have to have good data, and they have to be able to translate it. The problem I see is that often they'll do this translation, but they'll get it wrong. We generated marketing attribution generated, 250 million in net new opportunities this quarter. And the sales leader looks at Salesforce and goes, yeah, but we only had 120. You doubled the number. So if you don't have good data, you can often get your story wrong. So that's why, again, it comes back down to good data and then building a story out of that data that maps to KPIs that the rest of the organization cares about and understands.
So it's almost like you're talking about a cultural shift for marketers, how they present their findings, and cultural shift in training counterparts for the marketing leaders to understand and relate. And I know, Jon, when we were chatting about this before today, you had that interesting take on changing culture and opening people's minds to other things. And you had this reference to Moneyball. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that Moneyball is a great example of, creating a culture of data-driven decision making. And, if you haven't seen the movie, hopefully you all have. We talk about it a lot at SAS, but it's really where, it was a book in 2003. It became a movie 2011, 2012. But it's where the Oakland A's took a big risk on lesser known players using what's called a sabermetrics approach, or the empirical analysis of baseball that measures in-game activity and stats like on-base percentage, right? So they were identifying undervalued players and they were signing them to, these below market value contracts. And it began, as an effort for a smaller market team like the Oakland A's to compete with the much greater resources of these big market ones. I think, this Moneyball way of thinking, it can apply to business and not just sports, right? Smaller known players in the space, if they have the right data, the right leadership, and the right way of thinking, they can compete against the big boys, the big vendors, right? So, getting buy-in, in my opinion, to this culture requires helping everyone see the process of transformation using data, explaining the reasoning behind it, and just like Eric was saying, and having the story with the data to tell or show the results in a compelling manner, right? Who wouldn't want to be a part of something like that, where you can take data, craft a story, and then use that story to change your message or your activations and really leapfrog the competition? That's exciting.
I love it. We're a huge baseball family. And I love Brad Pitt. I doubt he knew what he was talking about in the movie when he was presenting all of the numbers and all the frameworks, but it's a phenomenal movie.
Yeah.
So as we kind of come to the last portion of our chat today, like when all of these wonderful things are done, when all of that is considered and we have data stewards and people are trying to utilize storytelling with data, like what is the future? What's the payoff? Like, how do we think about presenting that kind of, the next chapter of what organizations can enjoy and benefit from to get the buy-in, when talking to leadership? So, the sky is the limit. We're speculating here, right? But we would love to kind of help people understand where you could go if you're thinking about all of these things now, whether it's efficiencies with AI or whatever it might be. So, Jon, let me start with you since you were already talking.
Yeah. I think that, we're seeing, AI move teams beyond just, this rigid way of thinking to really using new and different types of analytics to be much more strategic, right? So if we think about, that analytics maturity model that Gartner and others use, moving from diagnostic and descriptive up through predictive, prescriptive, we're getting to the point now where marketers can, they can use AI to prescribe actions that, the customer, not only the customer journeys they create, the campaigns they run, but also actions that colleagues should take, right, to improve marketing efforts, not just reporting on what we did in the past and why it may or may not have worked, right? I think that, we're seeing customer engagement solutions now that can learn, adapt, and recommend actions for marketers to take, giving them time to be strategic and not have to be so tactical like they had to be in the past, right? And so I think that, if we think about the future of AI and how we're moving from generative into agentic and, the new advancements we've seen in quantum computing just recently, I think that, we're seeing AI now come alongside of marketers and help them be so much more efficient, right, in what they do. And I am one that believes that AI will never replace a marketer. You can't replace judgment, brand sensitivity, governance, creative nuance. I just don't think that can be replaced by AI. But will AI change the way marketers work? Absolutely. So marketers, get on board.
I love that optimistic take. Thank you. Eric, anything else to add?
Yeah, first I agree 100% with what John said. I don't think that it's replacing marketers. I actually think it's going to make marketers more valuable. It's going to make them more efficient, and it's going to allow them to stop doing like grunt work and pivot tables and things like that, and start really focusing much more on what's high value. I will, when you talk about payoff, I'll give you just kind of a concrete example, something we saw with one of our customers. We had a customer, and they run a large event every year, 7 figures in cost. And then when you layer in the people involved and the time and the hours and all these things, I mean, it was probably one of the single largest discretionary costs this organization has, and it was big. And every year, marketing and sales were like, we have to do it, we have to do it, we have to do it. It's super powerful for us, it's super impactful. And the CEO and the CFO were like, if we just took that much money and put it into ads, would it just do better for us and keep everybody focused on what they're doing? And they're like, we need to answer this question. And so they set up CaliberMind and they put it in place, and what they did is they created a couple of cohorts. So here's cohorts, here's all the companies that were sort of prospects and stuff before the event that attended the event. Here's a whole group of prospects that didn't attend the event. And they did an analysis on that data. And what they found was super interesting. They found that the sales close rate did not go up with the event, and the sales cycle did not go down. But the average sales size went up 20 to 30%. And more importantly, the churn rate, the retention rate of those customers went up dramatically because of the investment. And so now they came back to the CFO and the CEO armed with this data and said, this is what the event is doing for us, right? In addition to the brand and all of those things, churn goes down, we get higher retention rate for customers, the customers are more engaged with our brand, and the ACV, the amount of dollars we get per customer closing, goes up. And they kind of put to bed that question because now they had data. And every year they kind of monitor, they have the same system, and they monitor it, and they look at are these trends holding true over time? And that's the payoff. That's an example of the types of things that you can do when you have good data and you want to answer really strong questions.
I love that. Thank you so much. That is so visual. I can definitely relate. I've run numerous events in my life, and that question always persists. Should we or should we not? Well, with this, thank you both so much. I know we're at the end of the session. I love the discussion today. If somebody wants to find you, ask you a question, reach out to you, what's the best place to find you, Jon? Should it be LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn's a great place. Also, you feel free to email me, jonathan.moran@sas.com.
Fantastic. Eric, what about you?
Yeah, same. LinkedIn is an easy way to reach out to me, or just here at CaliberMind, Westerkamp with a K at CaliberMind.com.
Sounds good. Thank you guys so much.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.